Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry, and of course, this is my co-host.
My name is Chris Huddleston.
And today, we are both very excited to be talking to you about a very recent movie. Came out this year, last year? This year?
This year, yeah. I think it was just back in the spring.
Robert Eggers' third film, The Northman. Do you have a synopsis for us, Mr. Huddleston?
I do. So as you said, this was directed by Robert Eggers. It stars Alexander Skarsgard, Nicole Kidman. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this name right or not. Claes Bang, Ethan Hawke, Anya Taylor-Joy, among others. And the synopsis is Prince Amleth is on the verge of becoming a man when his father is brutally murdered. He was murdered by his uncle, who kidnaps the boy's mother. Two decades later, Amleth is now a Viking who's on a mission to save his mother, kill his uncle, and avenge his father. All right. So what did you think?
He myrtles his brother 2 decades later. What did I think of it? Before we just jump right in, because this is such a brand spanking new movie, we should reiterate that we do spoil these films. We talk about the endings and we talk about all the interesting stuff that happens in them. So this being brand new, and maybe you being new to our podcast, excuse me, I'm burping all over the mic here. Please be warned that if you don't want to hear us let any secrets out of the bag, then you should go watch this film first. I think you can rent it now on streaming stuff.
You can rent it, and then also it is available on the Peacock streaming network.
Right.
For people
that being said, what did I think of it? I loved it. I thought it was visually stunning. I thought it was action-packed. I thought it was bloody and violent. And I thought it was moody and brooding and scary and exciting, as I have come to expect from Robert Eggers over the other 2 films. Now, we've talked about The Lighthouse on this podcast in another episode, but
covered it.
Did we talk about The Witch, or we just talked about talking about it?
We did not actually. So we did an actual episode on The Lighthouse. We have not done an episode on The Witch, but it's come up in conversation here and there on other episodes.
Yes.
We have talked about Robert Eggers, just in general as a filmmaker more than once, I think.
Perhaps the best performance by a goat in the history of cinema.
Definitely among the top.
Before we parse it, what did you think of The Northman?
I was a little less enthusiastic than you were. So I enjoy have enjoyed his other 2 films. I liked The Witch. I liked the Lighthouse. Man, I can't talk tonight. I liked The Lighthouse even more. I thought The Lighthouse was fantastic. There's no doubt with this one that it is visually stunning, and I had wanted to see this in the movie theater. This is definitely one of these, see it on the biggest screen you can possibly see it on.
I agree.
So visually it's really fantastic. I thought Alexander Skarsgard put in a really good performance. And he's just a beast in this. I mean, he's just huge and ripped, and and I could see quite a bit of homage, if not outright just stealing scenes from other films in this. The beginning so Ethan Hawke is his father, he's the king, and his brother comes in and kills him, and the boy sees what's happening, and then it's not Alexander Skarsgård, it's a different actor, but sees what's happening. They behead the king and all that. That was straight out of the original Conan the Barbarian. There's another scene where there's one point where later on, when he's an adult and he lowers himself into this kind of a pit with a rope, that was right out of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I was like, he's going to have the staff of Orion, and all that's fine. Um, I thought there was a little bit of miscasting. Ethan Hawke, I just didn't think was,
Wasn't selling it as a Viking king.
he wasn't selling it as a Viking king. And Ethan Hawke is a good actor, but it's one of these things where, you're taking someone who is American and trying to have them do this Viking accent. And I think you're better off to just let them use their normal voice. It goes all the way back. I mean, I'm sure it goes back further than this, but do you remember the Robin Hood movie that Kevin Costner did, like back in the early 90s? And they just had him, I
almost wish
believe.
that I didn't, but I do.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where, he wasn't going to be convincing with the British accent. So I think sometimes you just either you hire somebody who can do the accent really, who is, so Alexander Skarsgard, even though I think he was born in America, but he's of Swedish descent. And I was reading that he had always wanted to do a Viking film, but he is convincing with the accent. I just thought Ethan Hawke, and he's only in it for the first few minutes. That said, I thought Anya Taylor-Joy did a really fantastic job with the accent, and I thought Nicole Kidman was good too.
Yeah.
I guess my main complaint would be that it's a pretty threadbare storyline. I mean, it's literally pretty much the synopsis is the entire story. He runs away, he escapes his father being murdered. He goes to become a Viking, and he spends the rest of his life plotting his revenge, which he ultimately gets. There's some little twists and turns, to make it a little more interesting, but I just felt like it was about a 45-minute story stretched out to 2 hours and 16 minutes. It definitely picks up early on. In all honesty, I was getting kind of bored. But it picks up once he starts to dispatch of these various people that are surrounded by the uncle. It definitely picks up, and the latter half of the movie is cool. And I thought the ending was really great. So I didn't dislike it. I was expecting to like it more than what I did.
I hear you.
And it's an odd movie because it's this artsy kind of Oscar bait type of a look with this very B movie horror film. Not that it's poorly done. I mean, it's well done, but gore with entrails and body parts and all this kind of stuff. So it's just a weird. I'm amazed in a way that this was a wide release. I mean, this played right here in Parkersburg, West Virginia. And I was reading that the budget, they said was between 70 and 90 million, and it brought in about $70 million. But they said it did well enough on VOD that it was considered, it made a profit. But
yeah,
so I kind of rambled on for a while
about
that.
Not at all. I hear everything you're saying. I think I saw the homage to those other sort of adventure films, iconic shots. What I kept seeing and hearing was Shakespeare. I mean, it's very much Hamlet. In fact, his name is Amneth, right? And the way that they say it is like Hamlet. So it's like they're calling him Hamlet at one point. I'm like, his name even sounds like Hamlet, that they're saying here. But of course, Hamlet, the ghost of Hamlet's father appears to Hamlet and tells him that he was murdered by his brother Claudius, who then marries Gertrude, his mother. And Hamlet spends a long time agonizing over it, can't quite bring himself to murder Claudius and exact revenge as his father's ghost demands. It takes 5 acts for him to finally muster. he's just not the type of character that goes right to the kill. He agonizes over it. You know, it's wrong to kill. What do I believe? Believe a ghost? You know, it's like, and I felt like part of the pacing of this movie is a little bit like that. There's a number of times where he has opportunity to kill his uncle and doesn't, for various reasons. Like, oh, it's not now, or someone's coming. I'm like, that doesn't seem to matter to you. You just killed this other guard. He's right there. Someone's coming. Just, you know.
Yeah,
he doesn't have a life after revenge planned. So I'm sort of like, what are you, until he falls in love with Anya Taylor-Joy's character. And then there is incentive for him to try and survive this. And he's faced with the choice of, do I abandon this revenge quest and follow happiness, or do I follow through with this bloody plan to exact revenge from my father? And realistically, I mean, this is pretty clear in the movie, realistically, probably not walk away from that. Right. And there's a prophecy that he gets, which I think is a spooky scene. Bjork is the witch or prophet, I'm not sure. People aren't really named. I mean, there's little bits of this that I think are super cool. There's a couple of mystical shaman type people. There's a sort of a berserker training ceremony where the guys, it reminded me of the Dune scene where the guy was like, I'm there, oh no, you know, and they're like doing this sort of ceremony of painting the blood on the forehead, and the guys are doing sort of in this film, they're doing sort of a berserker dance with their sword and shield while the guy is singing the song about Odin, the sort of shaman. But the other Shakespearean was Lady Macbeth. The wives in this movie are ferocious. And I thought, I was my eyebrow twitched a little bit when I saw that Nicole Kidman was in this, because I thought, so is this going to be a vanity thing for her? Like, and no, she's a great actress. I really like Nicole Kidman. One of the things I do note is that she's had a lot of work done, and you sort of see the work. I mean, she's not a young woman anymore, and that's fine, but there's been a lot of work done on her face to make her look young. I didn't find that distracting at all in this. I thought her performance was absolutely ferocious. In the scene where Amnett confronts her, presuming that she's going to be delighted that he's alive and that he's coming to avenge his father. And here's another spoiler alert. And she's actually sort of horrified and said, I hated your father and he was a clown, and I basically egged your uncle on to do this, which is very Lady Macbeth. But there's also a confrontation scene where Hamlet confronts Gertrude in the same way. And there's sort of weird psychosexual energy between them in the play that gets interpreted in a couple of different ways, you know, many different ways on stage. And this one, she actually kisses him, and it's the full Freudian weight of it. So I got really excited about all of that stuff. I agree with you that the pacing seemed to sag a little in the middle. It's not a real dialogue driven movie, which is fine, but there are long spaces where you feel like it's the plot itself isn't moving forward much. He's sort of biding his time, but Hamlet talks about it, right? Hamlet has these famous soliloquies where he's explaining, where he's hemming and hawing to the audience in soliloquy. And Skarsgård's character is a man of very few words. So we sort of get him brooding, but what you really, the camera just sort of, he's I don't know what work he did. He's obviously got absolutely ripped, but his deltoids are enormous. He's almost a hunchback. His deltoids, it's
insane. Yeah.
Like as if you were chopping wood predominantly. His deltoids are like, they're nuts. He looks like juggernaut a little bit. There's almost
Mhm.
no neck there. And so he's sort of lurching around, and sometimes he's, clothed as a slave, and other times he's shirtless and splattered with blood. But the camera seems to let following Skarsgård's character replace, stand in as the sort of internal monologue or motivation. And I don't know that it accomplishes the same work. So there's a part of me that agrees with you. Like this, you might have been able to cut, if you were ruthless about it, you might have been able to cut 30 minutes out of this film and not lost the tone or the sense of space. I mean, all of that. I don't know if they shot it in Iceland or whatever. He ends up in Iceland. It's gorgeous. The
Oh
cinematography
yeah.
is beautiful and the world is absolutely vivid. So it's not like, well, we need that time to establish. No. That's visually, it's very specific.
I think they used Iceland for Prometheus, some of the stuff that they shot in Prometheus, and it's a seemingly a great location because it looks like another planet,
Oh yeah, primordial.
Yeah.
I love that Anya Taylor-Joy has been in all three of Eggers' films. Well, no, she wasn't in The Lighthouse.
She's not in The Lighthouse, no.
But she was in The Witch, and she was in this one. And then, of course, I can't believe my brain goes to sleep. Willem Dafoe was in The Lighthouse and this one, not in the Witch. But I like that he returns to the same actors. I like that he, there wasn't a role for Anya Taylor-Joy in The Witch, but I mean in the Lighthouse.
In The Lighthouse, yeah.
I think The Lighthouse is probably my favorite of his three films.
I would definitely say that, yeah.
I think it's the tightest and the most complex and the most original feeling. And it's not overtly a horror film in the way that The Witch is. I mean, I think The Witch is more than just a horror film. I think it's a really interesting study on the family dynamic, and it's almost even a historical drama too. Like there's a lot going on in The Witch, but there's no way to sell that other than a horror movie. The Lighthouse is really like an art film. I mean, I don't know how else you'd pitch that. And then this one, I think you could sell it wide and you could open it wide as an action. Vikings are popular now, so you could sell this as a kind of an action adventure, but that's not strictly what it is. Although there's a lot of murder with swords and axes. There's a magic sword and there's a prophecy, and he goes into that tomb a la Conan and he gets the magic sword.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. That was very Conan as well.
The night guardian holding the sword comes to life and they fight, and then there's a sort of little coda scene where it makes it seem like perhaps that was all in his head somehow.
Yeah. I was unsure.
It's interesting because the film dances around the supernatural. It certainly paints a world in which the inhabitants of this world believe in the supernatural, right? They have shamans and ceremonies and visions and throw stuff in the fire and the smoke billows and they hear voices, right? But the filmmaker seems to be hedging his bets and saying like, well, whether or not there are gods and demons is open to interpretation. Like, I'm not saying this is a magic movie, but they certainly believe there was magic, right? Did you feel that too?
I mean, I took it, there were times where, like you said, you had the thing with the magic when he goes and gets the magic sword and has this battle with the knight or whatever, and then it seems maybe that was in his head. But you also have a scene later where he is captured and they tie him up in this kind of a hut, and they go to do something else. I forget what exactly was happening.
Right.
And these crows come and save him. They chew through the ropes and
Odin, he prays to Odin.
Yeah. So I took it as being literal supernatural elements. And if that's the case, going back to what you were talking about earlier with the where he's kind of biding his time, there's different times where he could have killed the guy. I felt like that was very movie logic, kind of a thing, because he has a magic sword and he's basically protected by these supernatural elements. If these crows can come and save him when he's tied up, it seems like he could have just gone in and just started killing people right away. And but then you have a much shorter film. Right. So as far as
the prophecy tells me, I will kill him in a lake of fire or something like that.
Which that was another thing that felt very Star Wars Episode 3 to me, fighting in the volcano.
Don't try it. I have the higher ground.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was a very cool scene, the way that was shot. I mean, it definitely, like I say, the movie for me definitely got better as it went along. As far as the Shakespeare element, I was reading that this was based on a Viking legend.
Sure.
So maybe they took that and then combined the the Hamlet aspects of it, or maybe Hamlet knew not Hamlet, but Shakespeare knew this Viking legend and borrowed elements. Who knows? But
the Vikings were earlier, of course.
Yeah.
And in Shakespeare, Hamlet was set in Denmark.
Mm-hmm.
Not exactly, but northern.
Yeah,
it could have drawn on the same source material.
Yeah, but I don't know if there were some other points that you talked about in there that I wanted to touch on, but
I just wanted to underline that moment. They catch him and they have him chained up before the crows come in and and free him in an unexpected way, right?
Mm-hmm. And he gets away, and they all run in expecting him to be in there.
They're like, now he's just butchered a bunch of their men, and it was like, we caught you, and now I'm going to kill you. And he's like, he says, you could try and stab me with the sword, but the sword will just turn, right? Because I am protected. And the other guy kind of looks at him. He's like, well, we'll be back later to kill you. I mean, that's not the line, but it's something like that. I'm like, kill him. What is this, James Bond? Well, Mr. Bond, I've waited for this moment my whole life, but I'm going to leave while it happens.
The villains were somewhat bumbling because I don't know if we brought this up or not, but he is he pretends to be a slave, and the uncle, they bring these slaves to them to use on their farm, because he had been a king and then he lost his kingdom and now he's a farmer, and so anyway, so they bring him in as the slave to do work. And that, I thought, was funny how a lot of that was handled, because they didn't keep track of the slaves very well. Like, I don't know why they didn't just like chain them up at night or something like that, but he just is able to just wander around and do all this stuff. And he's going, and it's kind of, it's almost, I don't know if it was meant to be funny, but I found it kind of funny, as he would go and kill one of these guys in the night, and then the next morning, they would have no idea who did it, and it was like, they thought it was a demon or something, and he kills several of them before they figure out what's going on. Right. I don't know. I just thought
they never figure out it's him until he reveals that it's him.
Yeah. But I just thought that was funny that he was able to do all this covert stuff with, not getting caught.
And it's a little bit like the slaves are a typical bunch of people, and then he is this juggernaut. Like, he wears this sort of shapeless burlap thing, but you can tell that he is jacked. I mean, he looks like, you give him the heavy work because he's the big, strong, muscly guy. And he carries himself pretty quietly. Like, he keeps his head down literally most of the time, but still, it's like, if you were looking around being like, who could have done this? Well, you got these 20 slaves here. Any one of them likely suspects? Well, why don't we just for the moment say it's none of the 10 women? All right. Yeah. So the 10 guys, let's apply a tiny bit of who has the strength to behead a man in a single stroke. Well, it's either him or maybe that dude. No offense. So, but you're not you're not supposed to think about it that hard. And I think that
No,
I
no.
feel like when you compare it to The Lighthouse, that just seemed to have so much poetry and mystery woven into it in every single scene. This one does feel more two-dimensional than that film.
I had read when this came out, and then watching it, I was laughing at this as well, but that this was supposed to be his sellout movie, basically, where like this
Oh,
is him selling out to do like a blockbuster movie or whatever. And the only way that I would that say that that is accurate, because this is a super weird film, um and I can imagine a lot of people going into this not really knowing what it was going to be, thinking maybe it was some sort of historical epic. And I can imagine people being turned off by this, by the weirdness of it, and just how, I mean, it is brutally gory and graphic,
violent. Yeah.
in parts. But it, compared to his other two films, there's definitely a silliness to this. I don't know if silly is the correct term, but just some of these little you don't really have, and they're very different kind of movies, but you don't really have in The Lighthouse and The Witch. um I don't know if you're watching those and thinking as much about the decisions that the characters are making as you are in this. You know what I mean?
I guess not entirely, but
I just mean the fact that there's various um things that we've already talked about, that's him creeping around at night and all of that, that
right.
just
Well,
doesn't seem as well structured as in his other films.
right. Tell me more about what you read about this being the sellout movie, because it does conform. Like if you wrote out the skeleton of the plot, of the sort of blow by blow paragraph version of events as they unfold, it does conform to a hero epic. It's the prince basically watches his father murdered by his usurping brother, flees for his life, returns as a man, returns to avenge his father. It's pretty straightforward. That could be Arthurian legend, that could be Star Wars, that could be anything, right? It's a pretty classic archetype. Setting it in Viking times seems like a very hip, popular way to do it now. Vikings are popular. I just did the studio come to him with this script or this concept, or did he think, I know what I'll do, I'll make this movie? And
So it was actually, from what I had read, it was actually Skarsgård. He'd been wanting to do a Viking film for a long time. And he, I guess, kind of had this idea, and then got hooked up with Robert Eggers, and then they met Bjork, and then Bjork actually introduced them to the screenwriter who ultimately wound up writing the screenplay. And I also read there was some interference, wouldn't be the right word, but this was actually, as it originally was, when it was tested for audiences, they used much more of the original language, and the test audiences were having hard, it was confusing for them.
Yeah.
So they took a lot of that out and used, they just spoke English instead.
Right.
So he wanted it to be more art house than it, or his original intention apparently was for it to be. So I don't know if there was any, I had read a little bit, and I'm just going from memory on this from a few months ago when the movie came out, but I had read that he wasn't entirely happy with this, that some of the changes that they made him do. So I guess from the sellout aspect, it was just more that his other two films, I mean, are not, there's very little action in them, whereas this is, kind of like, oh, this is the, even though it's still, like I said, very art house and strange,
It
there
wasn't
is
the
quite a
action
bit of
element.
action in this.
wasn't the action element to this that struck me. It was the kind of I don't want to say this in a pejorative way, the paint by numbers plot. Like, it's just so classic hero story shot through the lens of a historic epic with a lot of art house stuff, and the way in which he did the mystics and the witch and the shaman or whatever. I don't know what the proper terms would be for those characters, but he shot it like an art house film.
Yes.
But the script is not an art house script.
No.
The dialogue is not art house. The dialogue is not particularly elegant either. It's pretty on the nose, which I feel like it differs from the other two films that he's made. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe once you get that story put together, somebody's got a connection to a studio, and then the studio is interested in putting some money up, and then Nicole Kidman gets attached. And maybe that feels like a sellout movie because once there's studio money involved in it, the studio has a say. And they're like, well, we need to.
And I mean, this is a pretty big budget for what is essentially an art house film,
Yes.
$70 to $90 million,
Yeah. Yeah. And what surprises me actually is they didn't water it down more because it is graphically violent. And,
yeah.
A lot of his personal style is still there. But I feel like studios are pretty ruthless about being like, it doesn't taste like we want it to taste until it's got enough of our piss in it. Really.
That's a good
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And rarely do they say, we're just gonna get out of your way and let you make your movie, because it's a numbers game for the studios. Which is why The Lord of the Rings is such a surprise, right? It's so crazy that they would have financed that project. It paid off. I mean, that's a unicorn gamble that turned into a huge cash cow. But to greenlight all three movies to be shot over 10 years simultaneously and released, I mean, that was an enormous gamble on that in fantasy that was not a popular, it wasn't anyway.
No, not particularly. Yeah.
What's surprising to me is that there's as much of Eggers' hand still apparent in this, because I feel like it keeps it from being a flashy blockbuster summer thing because it's extremely dark.
Yeah.
Grim. And there's not a happy ending. He dies. He doesn't make it back to his wife and kid, which in a blockbuster he would. He'd stagger home and they'd happily ever after. So it's like, I feel like you got kind of the worst of both worlds. You watered it down enough to try and barely make it fit the template of the thing, but not enough that you can sell it as the thing you were trying to make it into. You can't really sell it as a blockbuster.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just like his style so much. Like, I enjoyed it. I didn't watch it as a blockbuster. I watched it as an Eggers film, but I feel like it's probably the third favorite of mine for all the reasons we've been picking apart.
Definitely for me as well. Yeah. I guess just for me, I hadn't really read, I mean, there's not a lot to spoil in terms of the plot, but I hadn't read a lot about the plot, but I had read just quite a few, and not critics, just regular people on social media just saying, oh, this, is one of the best movies I've ever seen, and this is a masterpiece and all this kind of stuff. And so I think I went into it a little too overhyped. And I would say with his other films, as artsy as they are, and slow burn type films, I've watched The Witch 3 times, and I think maybe I've watched The Lighthouse twice. So those are movies that I can watch somewhat repeatedly, and it'd be, I might watch this again sometime, but I wouldn't really be interested in repeat viewings with this one. It just dragged a bit too much for me at times. Like I say, once I guess maybe the last 45 minutes to an hour, I thought was really great. But you know, as you said, it sags in the middle, and for me, it sagged a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. I do agree that this would be better on a 75-foot screen. Like if I'd have gone and see this in IMAX, that would have
Yeah,
been way better.
yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. I mean, this isn't something that you want to watch on your phone or your laptop. You know, watch it on as big a screen as you can. You know, if you have a big screen in your home, watch it on that.
Um, that's about as much as I have to say about it.
And with Eggers in general, I mean, I think even though it's somewhat mixed on this, I think he's a really exciting filmmaker.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
you know, he's made 3 now films that are good to great. He definitely has a unique vision, and
And is able to
there,
convey that to his performers. Like
yeah,
everybody in his movies is in the same universe. And in The Lighthouse, it's a two-hander. But in The Witch, you really believe the people inhabit that universe
oh
together.
yeah,
This is a much larger cast than either of those two films, and it's still true. That's not nothing.
no, no. And you know, one thing that I was thinking about that really occurred to me a lot watching this, uh, is he really puts his actors through a lot. You know, it's not like they are, you know that Alexander Skarsgård is not actually doing all this backbreaking work and stuff, but they're muddy and they're wading through the mud and they're wading through water and all this kind of stuff. And I'm sure a lot of these, you know, it's not 80 degrees and sunny in this. I'm sure there was a lot of times in this film that the actors were cold and wet and muddy, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I don't know that these would be fun, and they're all like this, you know. I don't know that these would be fun films to work on, you
But
know.
shoot,
Yeah, you know. And I mean, I know it's movie magic, so you know, when they cut, they're putting on a big heavy coat or something, you
sure.
know. But still,
Well, they probably have space heaters. I mean, but you
yeah.
want to, when you're acting in a scene, you want it to be, if it's supposed to be bitterly uncomfortable, you want it
Yeah.
to be at least sort of uncomfortable.
Sure. And
You're too
cold is
comfortable, you're
cold, and
cold as
muddy
cold.
is muddy, you know. I mean,
Yep.
it's not like it's CG or something, you know. So
Right.
um so he you know, that just really struck me watching this. I just thought a lot of this probably would have not been much fun, you know. So, but yeah, so I mean, I think we're both going to recommend it.
I would certainly, if you're interested in this director's work, or if you're a fan of any of the performance, because I think the performance, I really loved Anna Taylor-Joy in this.
Yeah.
And I'm a fan of everyone in the first place. That Skarsgård does a great job. Nicole Kidman is great in this too. Yeah, I think it's worth a watch. You know, I would say of his 3 films, it's probably my third favorite, but it's also it's a different kind of film. There are horrifying moments, but it's not a horror movie. I mean, it's a Viking movie, you know?
Hmm.
Um, but I still think compared to many of the other films we've watched, I mean, this is a filmmaker who knows what he is doing. Like, it's
Oh, for
really
sure. Yeah.
masterfully shot film and meticulously directed film. And yeah, I think it's worth it.
Yeah, I would, like I say, I was you know, less thrilled by it than you. I think my expectations were just too high. But it's, you know, for people who liked his other 2 films, you're probably going to like this. If you weren't into The Witch or The Lighthouse, you know, this probably isn't going to be for you.
No, you're not gonna be like,
Um,
but the third one I loved.
yeah, I mean, maybe, you know, and I suppose there could be people that would fall into that category just because this is, um, you know, I think there was a lot of crossover with this for people who are horror fans that want to see a lot of blood and guts, which this has lots of that.
Yes.
Um, so, you know, the people that are into that, you know, this might appeal to them. But like I say, the guy is definitely a brilliant filmmaker, and there it has been, I don't know if this has ever been completely finalized, but there's talk of him doing a Nosferatu remake. I think this would be because there was the one from the silent one, and then Werner Herzog did one in 1979 or something. And so I don't know if this would be the third one or if there have been other remakes or not, but with Anya Taylor-Joy in it. And
As Nosferatu.
As Nosferatu, yeah. I forget who was going to play Nosferatu, but I don't think that's been in talks for a while. I don't know if it's ever been finalized, but that could be really exciting.
Yeah, that could.
I think. So yeah, I mean it's worth a watch, I would say.
I concur. So before we get on to what we're doing next time, Chris and Chris Talk Movies at gmail.com. That's our handle. We're on the socials. We're on the podcast. We're on YouTube. You might be listening to us right now. You might be watching us right now. Either way, thank you so much for joining us. Please like and subscribe. We love it. Leave a comment, a suggestion, some feedback, a question, and we will do our best to respond to it in kind. For next time, we had discussed Mad God, a Shudder original. Now, this is an animator that has worked with some truly great other filmmakers, and this is his pet project apparently over the past 30 years, and it came out just now or recently. It's an all stop motion animation thing, and it's a sort of a nightmarish, I don't really know what it's about, but you can watch
I don't either.
trailers online. It looks cuckoo birds. So I'm excited.
Yeah.
And maybe you guys should check it out and join us next time when we talk about Mad God.
Yes.
Yes. Cool. Beans, do you have anything else to add?
I did want to ask you if you have watched the Lord of the Rings show.
No, haven't watched it
okay.
yet. I do intend to check it out because we pinged back and forth. I read 2 reviews, one of which was literally fawning and over the moon, saying this is the single greatest fantasy cinematic adaptation of all time. And then another one that says this is kind of a catastrophe. Like it does almost everything wrong. And it cites a bunch of examples, not in a snarky way, but it was clearly a disappointment to the other reviewer. So there's a part of me that I'm like, well, this I got to see.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think the reviews overall have been okay. I don't think it was like, the consensus, I don't think, is that it's a disaster. Let me look here real quick, and I will tell you what it is on. I was trying to look for. Oh, okay. It's the Rings of Power, right? Yeah, it's an 84% on Rotten Tomatoes. So,
I haven't waited to do it yet.
Critics seem to be okay with it. Now, the audience score though is only 39%. So,
and that's unusual that the critic score is going to be higher than the audience score.
Yeah.
Unless it's like very highbrow. Like I would believe that for The Lighthouse. I would believe that the critics were like, this is a cinematic achievement, and audiences were like, what? I could see that, but hard for me to believe that the Ring of Power would do that. I'll check it out. What the 3 things that I have been watching are I've been watching the House of the Dragon on HBO, the prequel to Game of Thrones, and it's interesting. The performances are terrific, and the script runs pretty deep. I was a little afraid it would feel like watered down Game of Thrones light. It does not feel like that at all. If anything, it's more violent, and like in ways that I didn't really necessarily watch it for the violence, but some of the there are episodes like the Red Wedding where I was like, holy mackerel, like I need a minute. Like that was just so rough, and the violence in this in early episodes of this is shocking in similar ways. And I understand that's a seasoning you're using in this stew you're making of a series, but it's not one of my favorite seasonings. I sustain a little bit of it, but when it starts to feel really heavy-handed on that, I'm kind of like, yay.
Mm-hmm.
But the performances are great. Like the reaction shots of the principal characters while political stuff is happening, because political period things like this can be tricky. The people have to really understand how the way in which this other character says a thing has huge implications in terms of the machinations they're trying to make manifest, right? And the dialogue doesn't pick that apart. So you rely on the reaction shots of the other actors to give you a sense of, he's treading on thin ice and so forth. And I think the performances are very rich so far in what I've seen. So I'm watching that, and I'm watching She-Hulk, Attorney at Law, which I don't follow all of the Marvel stuff, but I like Tatiana Maslany a lot, and I think she's doing a great job. It's actually very like Deadpool. It's very slapstick and it's very comic, which I'm liking. The CGI looks like they didn't spend much money on it, because when she's green, she's almost entirely CGI. But I think it's an interesting character to explore, and there's a funny supporting cast, and they're bringing in a lot of cameos. They bring in Wong from
Doctor Strange,
and so yeah, I've been watching. And what's the third thing I've been watching? I guess I don't remember the third thing I've been watching. There's another serial show that I've been checking out, but it can't be too important because I can't remember what it was.
I was reading just in general entertainment talk that Netflix is kind of, at least the media is making out like Netflix is kind of floundering, but they are talking about now going away from a binge model to releasing their, in the future, they may go to releasing their shows each week.
Interesting.
Which,
that has to be money driven, right? Because the only reason you do that is if the show drops, people save it up and then they subscribe for a month and they watch absolutely everything they want to see, and then they unsubscribe for 6 months until it builds up again, right?
Yeah, and they were also talking about, some of the talk was that with the other streaming services like Disney Plus or Prime or whatever, or Hulu, where they do a traditional model, then it's basically like Netflix, a show comes out, the people watch it in a weekend or whatever, and then it's on to the next thing. Whereas, The Mandalorian or the Marvel shows or whatever, they're able to stretch that hype out over 8 or 10 weeks or whatever, right. But I think that's where Netflix is different, is the binge thing. I don't know, not to get into a whole side topic, but Netflix, their stock kind of skyrocketed during the pandemic because people were at home, and then all the stock people, the stock market analyst people were like, oh, Netflix stock dropped. What could have happened? Well, people went back to work and they weren't at home as much. You know what I mean?
Hard for me to
idea of just like exponential growth forever with companies, that we have
to imagine it foundering.
Yeah. But that's every article that you see now. It's like Netflix is in trouble,
the other thing is
they're on the verge of going under or something, right, which is not the case,
They were the first ones to go all in on streaming too.
Yeah. And now there's a bunch of competition.
Nobody's going to do that. But now HBO is caught up, Showtime is caught up, Peacock is caught up, Hulu is caught up, right?
Yeah.
And so on. Disney Plus, everybody's got that. Like, it's the new thing now, is to be a streaming platform. And if you just look at some of the other, HBO, Disney, I mean, they don't have shallow pockets. So when they decide this is the new way to go, you don't pay a cable company to subscribe to HBO anymore. You pay HBO them directly to subscribe through an app on whatever Roku or Apple TV or whatever it has, just the smart TV itself. Now those things have apps built into them.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's going to continue to evolve and change, but each of those different platforms does their own. Like Mad God is a Shudder original, right?
Yeah.
Shudder. And there's Paramount Plus, and there's, I mean, there's the heavy hitters. I think HBO is one of the heavy hitters, and Prime didn't even say Prime. Prime is one of the heavy hitters. So, and you need both hands to count the real players in this industry. So saying Netflix is floundering seems a little hyperbolic to me, but maybe they're not at the vanguard of the streaming services anymore, which they were for a long time.
Yeah.
Anywho.
So I don't know. That's pretty much it as far as that, just sort of general talk. But yeah, so we'll do Mad God for the next time.
Mad God. Great.
I don't know if you do not have Shudder, if there's a way to watch, if it can be rented somewhere or anything or not.
There's a 7-day free trial I noticed when I was looking at it. So you could always do that. Or I'm sure it works like all of the other streaming services. You could subscribe. I don't know if it's $6.99 or
Shudder's cheap. It's like $5.
Yeah, I mean, so really, if you were going to rent the thing, if there's any other single thing you want to watch on Shudder for a month, do the trial, subscribe to it for a month, cancel. I mean, I like that model. The onus is on me to remember to cancel these subscriptions.
That's the hard part. Yeah, I'm bad about forgetting.
$15, what the heck? Oh, I forgot to cancel that subscription. But yep. Thank you for listening. And we will talk to you next week with Mad God. Anything else we want to add about the Northman?
I don't think so.
No.
Yeah, it's worth a watch.
All right, gang, it's worth a watch. Check it out. Thank you so much for joining us. Like and subscribe, and we will talk to you next week.